Okay, we're talking about Division 7A today, so one of those perennial SME small business topics that we get to discuss fairly regularly. What we're talking about today, though, are some significant changes that are proposed to occur in terms of how Division 7A works and how, I suppose, we understand it today and how it will be going forward. This has been a long road, so it's 6 years since the Board of Taxation was asked to look at Division 7A on the back of many complaints from agents, clients, and even the tax office as to how Div 7A operated. It's overly complex. It doesn't necessarily meet the objectives that it was set out to meet in 1997 when it was introduced, so 21 years ago. And it needed a massive overhaul. What had happened with Div 7A is, like a lot of long-standing legislation, things were tacked onto it to deal with loopholes or shortcomings in the legislation, to a point where, as I say, it's not necessarily dealing with what it should do, and it's taking a hell of a lot more complications to get there. So the new Div 7A was slated to begin from 1 July 18, and we broadly talked about it in the past. So this session was originally slated as being the one where I was going to give you all the detail. I was going to tell you exactly what the detail of the new changes were going to be from 1 July 18. Which would have still been a bit of a stretch for you, given today is, within a month of the start date. That would have been a bit of a problem. So on budget night, 3 or 4 weeks ago, this is what the government came out with. When we were expecting the legislation, we'll start with the bottom paragraph there. The government said, we're still moving forward with the new Div 7A, but we're going to push the start date back 12 months. So rather than it start on 1 July 18, the new rules, they will start 1 July 19. So, as a bit of a tax nuffy who was eagerly awaiting the new legislation that night, sitting there at 5:30 waiting for it to be uploaded onto the government budget website, I was initially pretty disappointed that we'd waited all this time for this. But in the cold light of the day, when I was considering it after, these changes needed a lot more than 6 weeks for us to prepare anyway. So we do have an opportunity to think a little bit more closely and deeply about how these changes are going to impact our clients. We've got a pretty good idea of what the changes will be because they're the recommendations of the Board of Tax. The Board of Tax made those recommendations public in 2015. So we've known what the proposed model is going to be. The government has just been a little slow on the uptake in introducing that as legislation. Obviously, lots of other priorities have jumped over it. So we'll talk about what the changes are likely to be, how they will change or be different from what we currently understand, and then we'll look at the strategies that you need to look at over the next 6 to 12 months to make sure that when 1 July 19 does come around, that your clients are well prepared to go into this new regime. I wanted to, before we leave this sort of stop press, I wanted to draw your attention to the first paragraph. The first paragraph was a bit of a surprise because that says the government will ensure that unpaid present entitlements come within the scope of Division 7A from 1 July 19. Now that's an interesting statement because the tax office told us in December 2009 that UPEs are in Division 7A and that they'd been wrong prior to that in telling us that they weren't. And you'll remember that's why we then had pre-09 UPEs and post-09 UPEs, and we had to deal with Div 7A loans or sub-trusts for post-09 UPEs between companies and trusts. And it was all on the back of not the law changing, but the tax office's view of the law changing. And they said, look, the law's always been this way, we just read it wrong. Now we're reading it right, but to not penalise you, we will just draw a line in the sand on the 16th of December 09, which is when they issued their new view. That seems to imply that they were wrong, which would be a strange occurrence that they initially had a view, and in December 09 they said they were wrong and changed their mind, and now someone seems to be saying they're wrong again and they should adopt the original view, which just sort of illustrates what a dog's breakfast this whole division is. If the tax office doesn't even know what it applies to, and they have to introduce laws to then change a view that they believed was the new view, no wonder none of us can really understand exactly what Division 7A means. I'll talk about that announcement a little bit later on as we get through it. So what we'll talk about today is the broad sort of concept of Div 7A. It's not a concession. So it's an integrity measure aimed to prevent the private use of corporately taxed profits. So prior to 97, it was fairly easy for individuals to take money out of a company on the basis of a loan, and that money had only been taxed at 30% corporate tax rate, and use it for their own personal benefit. And clearly, that's not what the government wanted, nor the tax office wanted. We've got different tax rates for individuals and different tax rate for a company. So what they wanted was a provision that would say, if you're going to use those corporately taxed monies, you should pay the top up. The difference between the personal tax rate and the corporately tax rate. So that's ideally what Division 7A is meant to achieve. We'll talk about the standard Div 7A loan as we currently know it, and we'll talk about what the changes will be to that. So we know a fair bit about what they propose the new Div 7A loan to be, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about corporate beneficiary UPEs. So in a sense, that's what I was talking about with that legislation change. When a company lends money to when a company is distributed money from a trust, it's taken to have lent that money back to the trust if it doesn't call upon the entitlement. What happens at the moment? What are the tax office concessions, and what are the changes, including that new bit of legislation they're talking about? We'll talk about loans from trusts. Probably the most misunderstood area for most accountants in Div 7A is how trusts play a part in it. UPEs is part of that, but just loans directly out of trust can be caught by Div 7A if other things are also in place. So we'll talk about that and what changes are likely to do that. Some pretty good stuff there in the changes. We'll talk about the use of company assets. So where an entity or an individual uses a company's assets for their own private purpose, then Div 7A can apply to that. Pretty cumbersome at the moment. They've got some proposed changes to make that a little easier to comply with, so we'll talk about current and proposed. We will talk about the distributable surplus. That's an important concept because that's the cap on the consequence. So if you breach Division 7A, the consequence is that the amount of that breach, would be it a loan, payment or a debt forgiveness, is deemed an unfranked dividend to the shareholder or associate that's received that benefit. That deemed dividend is capped by the distributable surplus of the company, which is broadly the net asset value of the company. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what the Board of Tax said about that concept as well. And lastly, we'll deal with Div 7A mistakes. So at the moment, there is a process, again, a rather cumbersome, time-consuming process to correct mistakes that either you or the client or a former agent has made. There's a really good proposed change in that regard under the Board of Tax's recommendations, so we'll talk about that as well. And no doubt we'll have a number of questions on the way through. So, just as seen as to where we are at the moment, I said at the outset, 6 odd years ago, 2012, the government said to the board, go away and do what they call a post-implementation review of Division 7A. You know, we've got lots of feedback. that it's not doing what it should, it's too complicated, go away and have a look at it, talk to everyone you need to, and give us a report on what we should do, whether we should change it, whether it's good, whether we should scrap it. So they went away and did that, and spent a couple of years talking to every man, woman and their dog about Division 7A and what was good and bad, and otherwise about it. And they came up with a report they gave to government in mid-2014 that then was released publicly in early 2015. And they had 4 guiding principles. So they basically said Div 7A was broken, but that a new Div 7A should be based around 4 guiding principles. Number 1 is the new Div 7A must ensure that the private use of company profits attracts tax at the user's personal tax rates. So as I said before, that's that gap. So if a company makes $100,000 and pays 30 grand tax, if that 70,000 is used by someone other than the company, then essentially that other entity should pay the top-up tax in relation to that 70,000. That's the overriding objective. The private use, though, and that's not what the current Division 7A deals with. Number 2 principle, remove impediments to the investment of business income as working capital. So that's the whole UPE problem that essentially was created by the tax office, and maybe incorrectly given this new legislation they're looking to do. So when a trading trust needs the money to continue running its business, it distributes to a company because a company has the lowest tax rate. But it retains the after-tax income. That's your UPE, your classic corporate beneficiary, keeping the 70 cents in the dollar back in the trust's funds. Since 2009, tax office says that's a problem. That's a loan, Div 7A. It's not the private use of company tax profits, but the tax office told us that's Div 7A. What the board have said, we need to remove impediments for trusts to retain that income. So we need to fix Div 7A so that is no longer a problem. So we'll talk about how they propose to do that later. Number 3 principle, maximise simplicity. We don't know yet. We don't know whether what they come out with will be simple. The proposed changes sound relatively simple, but someone has to put them into legalese speak. So the jury's still out on that one. And the 4th principle was not to advantage the accumulation of passive investments funded by profits taxed at the company tax rate. So again, that makes sense. Companies don't get the CGT discount. So you don't want companies generating income, paying tax at the corporate rate, and then providing that income by way of a loan to a trust that then buys a passive asset and gets the discount. Because essentially then you've used corporately taxed profits to access a discount that corporates don't get. So the new Div 7A's got to deal with that, and they do. So mid-15, they give it to the government, there you go. Takes the government 2 years to read it. And in May 17, they say, love it. We accept your recommendation. This is the board put through a model that we'll talk about in a second, and the government said we support that model. And we will work to introduce legislation to start on 1 July 18. So that's where this process of change started. And then, as I said 3 weeks ago, the stock press says, still love it, but let's have another 12 months. So we're in that, hopefully, final 12-month period where we can start planning for this new Division 7A. So let's look at the current Division 7A and then let's look at the changes that are proposed. So you'll all be very familiar with this simple sort of process. Div 7A broadly is fairly easy to explain because it is a very broad and inclusive division. So it deals with loans, payments and debt forgiveness by private companies from the 4th of December 97. So that was the legislative start date. So if a private company makes a loan, a payment that is not otherwise accessible, or forgives a debt after the 4th of December 97, we need to pay attention to it. The second step is, well, who got the benefit of that loan payment or debt forgiveness? If it was a shareholder or an associate, then Div 7A applies. Shareholder's pretty easy, you can determine that. An associate is actually also relatively easy, because an associate is defined within section 318, which is the controlled foreign corporations provisions, so an international tax avoidance section, to basically be any entity that influences or is controlled by or controls a shareholder or the private company. And if you think about it, it is unlikely that someone who wasn't associated with a shareholder would receive a low interest loan or a tax-free payment or have a debt forgiven. So that's not typically a difficult hurdle to pass. So loans, payments, debt forgiveness from the 4th of December 97 to a shareholder or associate is called by Div 7A. Unless you can find an exclusion. So there are provisions within the division, we'll go through some of the more common, that exclude certain loans, primarily loans, payments and debt forgiveness. If you can't find an exclusion, it's in. So that's the way it's drafted. Unless they actually want it out, it's in. So we'll talk about the exclusions, and if you're in, you've breached Div 7A. What does that do? Deems an unfranked dividend to the shareholder and associate. Unfranked means, obviously, there's no franking credit, so even though the objective of Div 7A was to get people to pay the top up, the penalty is you'll pay tax again. So the company paid tax of 30, the shareholder associate will pay tax of 47. I know that's not quite 77%, but it's certainly not the top up. So even the consequence is not necessarily what they proposed. And if you've gone all the way through that and there is an unfranked dividend, the only way out of that is essentially the sort of beg for mercy discretion. So going to the tax office, actually fronting the tax office, admitting the mistake and asking them to disregard the breach based on some corrective action that you propose. Not generally a place you want to be. You'd obviously want to try and deal with it in the exclusions before you've got too far past it. But again, maybe that's a new client or something you picked up. We'll look at all those and how the changes will apply to that. So firstly, we look at exclusions. As I say, because it's inclusive, most of these coming out of companies will be included. So we need to find a specific exclusion to keep them out. So obviously the key one is there's a line in the sand. Like most legislation has a date, a commencement date. So if it's pre-4th of December 97 loans, and you may have some clients that still have pre-97 loans, that someone, your boss or a predecessor actually quarantined, provided it's not added to or materially changed in terms of its terms, then it's excluded from Div 7A at the moment. We'll talk about the changes. Loans to other companies. Now clearly if a company makes a loan to another company, then there is no mischief because no one other than that other company is getting the benefit of corporately taxed profits. So loans between companies, debt forgiveness between companies is not subject to Division 7A. Loans in the ordinary course of business. So this is a little bit more difficult to mount an argument. The company that is making the loan needs to be considered a money lender. So it needs to be in the business of lending money, like a bank. We've had a couple along the way, so there might be wealthy family groups where one of the entities in the group is the sort of treasury entity. So from an asset protection point of view, that handles all the internal financing. It might borrow from a bank itself and then on lend out or use its own funds to lend out. It needs to be carrying on a business of money lending. So all the normal carrying on a business indicators you look for any client who's operating in some kind of activity, you'd need to satisfy there. Fairly difficult. The most common exclusion are what we call the excluded loans. So when you identify a client that's made a loan out of a company that's going to be caught by Div 7A, the easiest way to get around it if they can't repay it is to set them up in an excluded loan. So a Div 7A complying loan or a Section 109N complying loan agreement, that's what we do. At the moment, that has to be in writing, so either online or through a lawyer. We'll print off our Div 7A loan agreement, we'll have all the details put in there, and it'll be on a defined sort of term and structure. Written and executed before the due lodgement date of the company for the year in which they made the loan. So if it was a 17 loan, obviously you had until 15 May just gone to have that in writing and executed.
So that's specific due lodgement date, not the date of return.
It looks at the due date for lodgement. I think there's an argument that if you lodged it earlier, you should have had it by that date. The tax office are fairly open on that. So, who lodges early anyway? It's more lodging late. So that's the problem where if you're still working on it, you needed the agreement by the due date for lodgement, which is 15 May. You're probably more common the other way. But again, it's a fairly onerous thing. The tax office is usually fairly open on that. There needs to be a minimum interest rate, which is again prescribed within Section 109N. It's the RBA owner-occupier rate, and usually June every year, so the tax office will tell us what that is. So for loans in the 18 year, it's 5.3%, and shortly we'll get another statement from us to what it will be for loans in the 19 year. Fairly low. And the term is either, if it's secured against real property, then the term can be up to 25 years. If it's unsecured, which most of these loans are, it's 7 years. Obviously our repayments then through that term, P&I, principal and interest repayments, from every year from year 2, all the way through to the end of the loan. If it's secured, we'll talk about it more in terms of one of the strategies I'll discuss a bit later, secured against real property, and the value of the real property needs to be 110% or more of the amount of the loan at the time you take the loan out. You can have second mortgages, but again there needs to be sufficient equity outside the first mortgage to secure that amount of the loan. 110% essentially of equity. We'll discuss that a little bit more. So what's the proposal? So we know how to do a Div 7A loan at the moment. We know what it is. We run it off, get a $44 online loan agreement, and away we go. And we work the calculations out, and each year the client makes payments or we declare dividends and run them around, whatever we do to deal with it. The Board of Tax recommended the amortisation model, which was basically an amortisation of the loan over a flat 10-year term. So what they've said is we don't think 7 years is enough. We think 25 years is too much. We don't want to have a distinction between secured and unsecured. So from 1 July 19, we're going to have a flat 10-year loan. That's it. No differentiation between secured or unsecured. We'll go straight to 10 years. And we don't want to have the sort of requirements for there to be annual principal and interest repayments. So from an amortisation point of view, we'll have certain thresholds. So at the end of year 3, the loan needs to be at 75% of its balance, and the accrued interest at that point needs to be paid out. Year 5, 55% of its balance, and the accrued interest paid off. 25% at year 8, obviously all gone in year 10. So essentially, over 10 years, your client would only need to make 4 repayments. That might be dangerous for some clients. You might want them to be paying still on a regular basis. You can still do that, but that's the minimum requirement. The benefit, I suppose, is if a client is potentially doing it tough in a particular year. So in year 2, 4, 6, 7 and 9, they don't have to make repayments. It means they'll have to catch them up by those other dates. Maybe they have a year off. Or maybe they've made a particular a large capital gain in year 4, and you don't want to whack another big dividend on top to deal with your minimum repayments, you can leave it for that year, and then they push that bigger dividend through in year 5. So there's a little bit more flexibility in that repayment schedule. And I spoke about the interest, again, same deal. It doesn't need to be paid each year, it needs to be accrued, but then it moves through on those 4 different payment dates. No written agreement. So the board said, we don't need a loan agreement. You don't need to go and download a loan agreement or instruct a lawyer to do a loan agreement. But we need some kind of evidence that a loan has been made. And they were comfortable with electronic evidence. So even in the accounts. So if you journaled a loan and then it ran through the accounts, that's sufficient. I would be leaning more towards a resolution where the company resolved to lend money to X on such and such a date on Division 7A terms. And there's your document. Stick that in your company secretarial file and your work pages, and there you go. But you don't need to get a legal remedy. So all the online legal houses will be a little bit disappointed in losing that little bit of income. So that's the good simple stuff. Now we get into some of the bad simple stuff. Not all simple stuff is good. The board recommended that the interest rate was too low. So the RBA owner-occupier rate is not really comparable with the types of loans that are being made by private companies. They're not generally, if at all, being lent for them to buy houses. They're being lent for personal purposes or investment purposes. So they say a better indicator interest rate would be the RBA rate for small business overdrafts in the May for the year prior to the year the loan was taken out. So the first interest rate we'll be looking at is May 19 for the 1 July 19 and onwards loans. Obviously I don't have May 19's interest rate, but the April 18, May 18 is probably out now, but I checked that this morning. April 18 is 8.65%, and it had been that for a few months. So that's 60% higher than the current one. So that's quite significant. If 7A loans are going to cost them a lot more. Maybe they're trying to force people to go to the bank. Don't borrow money from your own companies, go to the bank. And numerically there, that's an extra $3,350 a year in interest on every $100,000 a loan. So that's not immaterial. Existing loans will get a further 3 years, so it's not like everything starts again on 1 July 19. If you're already in a 7-year loan, then it'll get another 3 years added to its term from 1 July 19. Now you'll need to amend that agreement, because obviously the agreement will say 7 years, and it'll say the lower interest rate, and it'll say annual repayments. So you would need, I'd imagine, a variation. So the lawyers will get at least, maybe $29.95 to do a variation document to convert your 7-year loan to a 10-year loan. But then after that, that'll be the end of their Div 7A gravy train. And I'd imagine, again, the detail we'll have to wait on, but then they would just, so if you're 4 years into a 7-year loan, you'll then be 4 years into a 10-year loan, which means you won't have to make a repayment at the end of year 4. You could then wait till the end of year 5, but the balance would have to be 55% of the loan. So you would just roll into the new regime. That second last dot point is the one that is causing the most angst around the place, and the one I'm probably most glad that we have some more time to consider. And they're the strategies we'll get to in a second. In the interest of simplicity, the board said we don't want, pre-4 December 97, pre-December 09, pre-1 July 19. Let's bring them all in. So from 1 July 19, if it's not already in, it's coming in. So pre-97 loans will begin a Div 7A time clock on 1 July 19. Pre-09 UPEs will begin a 10-year time clock on 1 July 19. So they're the ones that you want some time to look at, because you're probably, like most, just ignoring them because they're quarantined. you're looking at the ones that are currently on Div 7A agreements or on sub-trusts or something similar. The stuff that is quarantined, we're just taking quarantine to mean ignore. As long as we don't touch it, we'll leave it alone. So the proposal is they're going to come in and you'll have 10 years to repay them on the basis that we've been talking about, 8.65% or more interest rate, 4 repayments over that period, we'll pay them all off. So that could be scary for some, and I'm certainly looking at some accountants' clients already that have considerably large pre-97 loans, one in the tens of millions of dollars, and some large pre-09 UPEs that we're quite happy to ignore at the moment, but will come within this regime. So there are some things you might want to look at, not only with those things, but also with existing 7-year loans. There's only one thing they've said, or the board have recommended, be grandfathered in this transition from the old Div 7A to the new Div 7A. They've said, we don't want 25-year loans after 1 July 19. However, if a client already has a 25-year loan, we will let them see that out. So clearly an opportunity there is, if a client has the ability to secure a loan against property, then let's look at doing that. If it's a 7-year loan at the moment and we're 3 years through it, and we can secure it against property, we'll get another 22 years. Collectively, it's got to be 25. If it's a pre-09 UPE or a pre-97 loan, and 10 years is going to put a bit of a strain on them, maybe we can secure it against some property on a 25-year loan, and they'll have 25 years to repay it, not 10. We've bought ourselves a bit more time. Obviously, to be secured, there needs to be some real property, some real estate out there that we can secure the loan against. 110% value of property as against the loan. That property doesn't have to be held by the borrower. So it doesn't need to be property that the borrower holds. It could be property that another entity, a trust or another company or another individual within their family group owns, that has enough unencumbered equity value to secure against that loan. Obviously, everything bar a super fund. You would be using a super fund's property to secure your own Div 7A loan, but any other entity that has property can put that property up as security. Second mortgages are okay. So if the bank's already involved, it's a $1 million property and the bank have a $300,000 loan on the first mortgage, and there's $700,000 in equity. So that's 600 odd thousand, and we need the 110%. 600 odd thousand we could secure on a second mortgage on 25-year loan terms. However, you've got to get the bank's permission. And we've been doing this for a number of clients, and not all banks are the same. Some are open to it, but will still take a considerable amount of time to agree to it. Others are completely closed to it. So if that's a strategy for a client, that's a good one to be looking at in July, August, just in case it takes you all the way to June to actually get it through. Banks will require things like a deed of priority, which really just confirms that their first mortgage, gets first dibs. So that the second mortgage really can't, overtake priority in terms of the first mortgage. So there's documentation, there's costs. Nothing the bank does comes without costs. Obviously, you'll have to register your own mortgage. You need a solicitor to do that. There'll be costs involved in that process. So if that's a strategy, look at that, July, August for some clients, start those discussions early, because it might take you 3 to 6 months to actually get the thing through. A risk is, and this was a risk we thought might occur on budget night just gone, which is why we jumped a bit early on these 25-year loans. There has been some talk that because it's grandfathered, they won't grandfather all the way up to 30 June 19. It might be grandfathered to the date the legislation is introduced. So it's not unusual for them to say, this new Division 7A will apply from 1 July 19, and all loans from that date will be converted to 10-year loans, except 25-year loans to 7:30 PM Eastern Standard Time on the 6th of April when they actually introduced the legislation. So I don't know whether they'll let us go all the way up, but they could introduce this legislation in August. We're busy with the current budget stuff at the moment. It might be November, it might be February. It might be bloody May again next year. I don't know. But again, let's start the process, at least talk to a client about whether they, and you can do some simple cash flow projections based on 10 years repayments, based on 25-year repayments. It's clearly going to show a better result in 25 years. Let's get into it, let's get it done. So that's a good strategy. Yeah. 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 You get 25 less when you used. Yeah. So you've used 3, you get 22. You don't get 32. Unfortunately, there's a couple of. No, because that's a there's 109R which says it's back to back. They don't treat it as a repayment. So there's a provision that allows you to do it, to move 7 to 25, and that's exactly what it says. You don't get that extra time. So that's a strategy. That's a fairly, conservative, risk-free strategy. It's just convincing the banks and getting it done. What about some other strategies? So, as I said, they've said the way they said it was quite cute in a sense. They said, look, people are worried about pre-97 loans. They're worried that they've been quarantined for so long, and the tax office might change their mind, or something might happen to trigger Div 7A. So to stop them worrying, let's just bring them in. Which I thought was interesting. I wasn't worrying that much that I wanted to deal with it, but that was the way the board sort of looked at it. They gave it. I think they termed it. They want to give these borrowers an opportunity to normalise their loans, all on the same footing. Because that's what they lay awake at night worried about. So that's that creates that problem. If it's a big number that they've never had to pay in the past 20 odd years, then if they're going to have to repay it, is 10 years going to be enough? 25 might be better for them. Same with the pre-09 UPEs. There's probably more clients, or there's definitely more clients with those than there are with pre-97s. So what do we need to do now? So that strategy of the 25 years, clearly is relevant for those as well as existing loans. But you need to go and identify those pre-97s and pre-09s. As I said, you're probably not managing them at the moment because you don't have to. You're managing the other ones. So again, that nice July work where everyone's sitting around with their feet on the desk. Let's go and find out all of our clients that have pre-97 loans or pre-09 UPEs. Let's see what that problem's likely to be. And then we can start talking to them about strategies. Are they aware we do nothing? 10 years. Should we put it into 25? Or should we look at some other strategies? So already breached. So we've used this in the past, but not as a strategy, but more as a defence. So the only real Div 7A audits or reviews that have been done by the tax office have been part of high wealth reviews. So when they're looking at a family group and they ask for details of all their accounts, they're looking at loans between the entities and they'll raise Div 7A issues. So we've done a couple in recent years where the accountants have said, look, can you have a look at the stuff we're sending in before we send it in, just so I know there's not a problem, or if there is, we can deal with it. Because the letter from the tax office always says, we'll give you this opportunity to let us know if there's anything you want to talk about before you send it in, and you can get a reduction in your penalties. So, come forward, save us having to come and look for it. So we've identified Div 7A breaches in the past. And, the accountant says, well, geez, what do I do? The two cases we've had a win on this already breach sort of strategy is, if the breach occurred more than 4 years ago, then no amendment can be made to that year's tax return. So if you identify a breach from pretty much 2012 or prior, then there's nothing you nor the tax office can do to trigger Div 7A. You can't go back and amend that year's return. It's out of time. So we have drafted the submission on behalf of the accountant and the client saying, thanks for the opportunity to review. We have identified a breach in this year. For these reasons, this is why we think it's a breach. However, we understand under Section 170, which deals with the amendment period, we're out of time to amend. Please confirm. And in both occasions, although they took a little bit of time, that's it. It's that quick. So, whilst we might have been going, certainly with clients we picked up from other accountants, we may well have been not that keen to look back because we're afraid of what we might see. Maybe we should be looking back. And as long as what you see is more than 4 years ago, then call it, own up to it, deal with it.
That's a question. Sure, if you identified an incident problem 4 years ago, you said, well, that's outside the amendment period, but the loan's still exists.
Yes.
You haven't solved that problem, have you?
Well, you know what you would then do?
No.
Forgive the loan. So you would today forgive the loan. So do a deed of forgiveness between the parties and forgive the loan. Remove it from the accounts. Now what's the tax implications of that? You breached Div 7A on that loan 6 years ago. You can't breach Div 7A twice on the same loan. So the loan breached Div 7A, the debt forgiveness can't do it again. So the tax was dealt with 6 years ago. You just didn't realise it. You deal with the accounting now. So you forgive it out of the accounts, run it through your P&L, however you deal with debt forgiveness. It comes out of the tax rec because it's got nothing to do with tax, and it's gone. And your 30 June 18 accounts no longer have the debt. Your 30 June 19 accounts no longer have the debt, nor do the comparatives. And when this legislation starts, what then? It was never there. So it's a technical argument. Now the only but on that, and I haven't seen them applied in terms of Div 7A, but they've been applying it in some other orders. Fraud and evasion are typically Siamese twins. They usually hang around together. The tax office usually throws them out together. But in the last couple of years, they've been sending evasion out on its own. They haven't been alleging fraud, which is more of a criminal act. They've been alleging evasion, which is a blameworthy act, not necessarily criminal, that has essentially, I suppose, covered up the breach. So what might be a blameworthy act? You identified the breach, you told the client, and neither you nor the client did anything about it, and then the 4 years passed. So if you knew about it within the 4 years but did nothing about it, that's a blameworthy act. I would think that's evasion. And evasion, no time limit. So where this strategy probably works the best from a vanilla point of view is you pick up a client from an old accountant, and as part of your review, you will identify that more than 4 years ago they breached Div 7A. Deal with it. Own up to it.
Be aware that you've breached Div 7A.
That's true.
But it's a loan balance sheet.
If you're an accountant, you should be aware of it. That would be an argument for that accountant as to why didn't you understand what Div 7A
Also, they have to be aware they're already financial system.
Yeah, but they might not understand what Div 7A is. The client's probably got more of an argument that they commit a blameworthy act. But you know, if it's correspondence, or I think the accountant would be hard pressed to say they didn't or shouldn't know. That would be an argument for them as to what their competency levels are. You know, an argument in court that no, I'm a dummy. How would I know? Yeah, just to get out of that case, you know, I don't know.
But it's quite an issue.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So, in a sense, you're looking at, it's clearly not a blameworthy act for you, because as soon as you identify it, you're looking into dealing with it. As long as the client wasn't aware of it, or doesn't have any evidence whether, you know, like letters or emails from his previous accountant told him to deal with it, then he should be okay, or she should be okay. Whether the other accountant is okay, it's another issue. You don't know. You don't know what they knew, what they didn't know. But there are, as you say, there are plenty of accountants out there who don't understand 7A. You're doing the best thing by your client, which is, that's a breach. Let's call it a breach. We can't do anything about it. Let's remove it from the accounts. What I'm dealing also with there, though, is also, you know, those pre-09 UPEs, because it seems to me that the tax office said that UPEs were always called by DIP 7A. That's what they told us in 09. But we got it wrong. So because we've changed our mind, we're only going to draw a line from 16 December 09. Now that's not in the law. That's a concession. So if their view is right, which up until that announcement from the government, which, you know, we're not sure exactly what it means, but the tax office has now told us they were wrong, then isn't an 08 7654321 all the way back? Aren't they DIP 7A loans? And didn't they breach DIP 7A? Just because the tax office made a mistake and isn't going to go back and, you know, cause a breach, we might say, we're happy for there to be a breach. Because guess what? It's outside of 4 years. Can't be a blameworthy act because you, Mr. Tax Office, told us that it wasn't a breach. You said you were wrong. We don't want to use your concession, thank you very much. We want to apply the law. And the law says, according to you, that we breached it in 08, 7, 6, 5, and that's outside 4 years. They've dug themselves into a lot of holes in DIP 7A by creating concessions to fix problems that they themselves created, which is part of the dog's breakfast of what is DIP 7A. Statute barred is another interesting one. It's a trigger to then look if you already breached. So this was a big issue in the early 2000s. So there was a Victorian Supreme Court case, nothing to do with tax, looked at your sort of commercial debt position, where a lender and a borrower were arguing about whether a debt had become statute barred. Statute barred means that that under the relevant state, each state has a Statute of Limitations Act. Under that relevant state's Statute of Limitations Act, the debt has become barred from recovery. And the way that legislation works is that if the debt is not acknowledged within a 6-year period, which is the statute of limitations period, then it's considered to have become statute barred, which means the lender cannot enforce repayment on the borrower. They've run out of time. The sort of bar lease. You're past your statute of limitations. So the issue in that case was what's acknowledgement. So making a repayment is acknowledgement, which starts the clock again. Every time there's acknowledgement, another 6 years. Writing letters between the two, Scott, remember that $1,000 I lent you, happy to keep that rolling on, when you're right to repay it, you write back, yeah, cool. Your clock starts again. Keeps you running. Or you pay interest or whatever that you're acknowledging the debt. Starts the clock. The Victorian Supreme Court case looked at just acknowledgement in the accounts. The director just signed the accounts. Not specifically the debt, but there's lots of stuff in the accounts. And that case said that that wasn't enough to acknowledge the debt. So the debt became statute barred. So then the question became, well, what does that mean for tax purposes? If a debt statute barred, it can't be recovered, does that mean it's forgiven? And if it's forgiven, does that trigger Div 7A? So people were worried that the pre-4 December 97 loans they'd drawn a line on, assuming that drawing the line was an acknowledgement, then on the 4th of December 2003, they'd become statute barred if we didn't do anything to them. And that would trigger Div 7A, so we don't want that. So this is 2002, early 2003, we asked the tax office, what does it mean? What does this whole statute bar mean for Div 7A purposes? They said, very good question, we'll get back to you. Unfortunately, they didn't get back to anyone until 2006. And they said, yeah, that's a problem. If a debt becomes statute barred, it will be forgiven for Div 7A purposes, which we'll deem a dividend. So what we did in 2003, because the tax office hadn't come back to us, is we acknowledged debts. So, you know, you'd pay $100 off the debt. Or you'd write a letter acknowledging the debt between the two. And that started the clock again. And then, thankfully, when they came out with their view in 2006, we said, oh, cool, lucky we did that. But the tax office, again, putting another concession in place that's nothing to do with the law, said, yes, it's a problem. Our view is that the loan will be deemed forgiven because the statutory period has lapsed. But we won't be taking any active compliance action. So there's a breach of the law, but we're not going to do anything about it. Exactly what they said in 2009 with the UPEs. It's a breach of the law, but because we told you the wrong thing, we're not going to do anything about it prior to this date. Let's deal with it going forward. So again, what I'm saying is, well, and that's still their view. So the website at the moment says, for the purpose of Div 7A, a debt is forgiven when recovery of the debt becomes statute barred as a result of its age. So if any of those debts, and I'm looking at the old debts, I'm looking at the pre-97 debts, the ones that aren't already on terms, if they're already statute barred, then they've been forgiven. And if they've been forgiven, they've breached Div 7A. And if that's more than 4 years ago, we can get rid of them. We can write them out of the accounts. Now, you're not going to make, nor am I going to make a decision as to whether a debt is statute barred. We need legal advice for that. So it depends on what the debt is. So say I've got a guy, $44 million in pre-97 loans. He is not pleased about bringing them into the new regime. So we're looking at a number of strategies. Is it statute barred? If not, do we look at the 25 years? He's not just going to sit back and wait to roll it into a 10-year repayment and have to pay principal and interest, probably $5 million a year over that next 10-year period. So if it hasn't been acknowledged through repayments or any other communication or variations of loan agreements or new loan agreements, if it's only been acknowledged through accounts, and even then, who signed the accounts? Both sides, have they signed the accounts? Did anyone sign the accounts? Not a lot of clients sign accounts anymore. So, has there been any acknowledgement? If it hasn't been acknowledged, when did it become statute barred? If it became statute barred in 2003 or 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 or 15, what's the Div 7A impact, and are we out of time?
So if you had those situations, you would want to get a legal opinion?
Yeah, because it's not
statute barred.
Exactly, because the legal opinion is, under the Statute of Limitations Act of WA, each state has one, has that debt become statute barred, and if so, when? So it's not a tax matter. The tax consequences follow that fact. So if a lawyer is confident enough to give you that opinion as fact, then the tax consequence is Div 7A was
You're
breached.
saying him with the accounts, and these
I want to show everything to them. So all correspondence, any acknowledgement, because obviously the opinion's only as good as the facts you give them.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine, again, we're talking to some lawyers about how that process will look. They want to see all correspondence between the debtors and creditors that mentions or is in relation to
in
that
most
debt.
cases it'll be the same.
Yes.
It won't be.
No.
Yeah.
Yep. The twist in that is that whilst that Victorian Supreme Court case in the late 90s, I think it was, said that the acknowledgement in the accounts wasn't enough, there was a New South Wales case, I think within the last 10 years, that said it was. So it seems to be a facts and circumstances thing. You know, what was in those accounts? What was acknowledged by who? You know, if the director of the company is the director of or the trustee of the trust, then that's probably closer to being acknowledgement. The debt from the company to the trust, and that same director's signed both accounts. But again, I don't know how it works for you guys. Do you enforce or recover signed accounts from your clients, or do you just send them out? Good. A lot of people don't. They do the work. You know, the banks don't really care if they're signed or not.
We don't do that.
Yep. That might count against you in this argument, but that's for other people. That's good. But again, you're not doing that to try. It is what it is. So,
but that's also the other argument where the client can't deny any knowledge. Sort of thing you were talking before about whether or not it's the accountant's responsibility and or the client's responsibility.
Yeah.
They're signing the accounts.
just means there's a loan. They're not necessarily to know what the Div 7A consequences are. So yeah, it's another step. But that's an area to look at. Again, if you've got clients that have particularly old loans that are of a reasonable amount, that getting some legal advice on whether it's statute barred makes sense, then that's something to look at. We'll certainly be letting you know what indications we get, but it's clearly an issue out there where loans do become statute barred. We want to investigate that now, whereas in the past we were sort of not wanting to address it because the tax office said, oh look, we're not going to bother about it, so we said, oh beauty, that's nice. Maybe we don't want to be so nice, maybe we want to get rid of it. So let's have a look at statute barred. So in summary, that's the new model. So this is really we've just been looking at the vanilla Div 7A. Maximum loan 10 years, P&I in years 3, 5, 8 and 10, no written agreements, just some kind of electronic evidence. Everything's in, pre-existing loans in court. That's really where the strategies are coming from. The only grandfathering are complying 25-year loans that are in place either before the legislation comes in or before 1 July 19. Everything else is going to be in there. Everything else is going to roll into 10-year terms. All right, so let's look at UPE. So this is the troubling bit, and again, another bit where the tax office have tried to put a solution together to fix a problem that, frankly, they created. So, as I said a few times, December 09, they said, oops, we made a mistake. When a private company does not call upon a distribution that's been made to it by a trust, then that UPE is essentially financial accommodation that the company's provided the trust. That's a loan for Div 7A purposes, and essentially always has been. But because it's a U-turn, we'll draw a line arbitrarily at 16 December 09 and quarantine everything before it. We'll deal with the consequences after that. So what did they want you to do? Well, like all Div 7A loans, they wanted you to either pay it out, so the trust had to physically pay the money to the trust. That's easier said than done. Or put it on a Div 7A loan. So the company then just essentially lends that money back to the trust and runs on a 7-year repayment cycle. Now, for whatever reason, and maybe that was because they were being nice, they gave us another option. Not a statutory option, another concession, another workaround. And that was the sub-trust option. So they said, well, we understand the trust might not be able to lay their hands on that money and physically pay it. We understand they might not want to put it on a principal and interest loan over 7 years. So we'll let the trust create a sub-trust for that UPE, put aside for the absolute benefit of the company. And again, they understood that there is no pot of money sitting there, so you only had to put it aside in the accounts. So if a trust distributed 100 grand to a company, paid the 30 grand tax for the company, there's a $70,000 UPE. So left as it was, that would cause a Div 7A breach. So their option was rename it from being a UPE to being the 2017 sub-trust and put that in the account, $70,000. And then provided all of the income from that $70,000 is paid to the company, that'll be fine. But obviously there is no income on that $70,000 because we don't know where it is. It's just slushing around in the trust's working capital. So they put up some options, some more workarounds. They said you could make that $70,000 under option 1 a 7-year interest-only loan. So you just need to pay the company interest at the Div 7A rate every year for the next 7 years. And then at the end of 7 years, you've got to pay the company the 70 grand. Or option 2 is a 10-year interest-only loan. It's a higher interest rate, that RBA small business overdraft rate, for 10 years, and then at the end of 10 years, you're going to pay the 70 grand. Or the third option was identify an asset or a group of assets worth about 70 grand, and whatever they earn, pay the company. Not many people use that option. Most use the 7 or 10 option. But there's no law around that. This is all an administrative creation. None of this is in Division 7A at all. There is no mention of sub-trusts, interest-only loans, or whatever. So, since 2011, which was the first sub-trust essentially, in 2010 UPE became a 2011 sub-trust, people who have run sub-trusts, and they've dwindled in terms of the number who did, had the ability to make these interest-only payments. But they had to actually repay the principal within the next month. 30 June 18 was the first day the sub-trust needed to be fully repaid. And the tax office got a bit worried last year. What happens if people can't do it? We can't apply a provision to punish them because there's no such provision that deals with sub-trusts. What are we going to do? So they put another practice statement out with another workaround that said, we'll allow them to convert that sub-trust into a 7-year loan from 30 June 18. So they essentially have a 7-year interest-only loan, but they then roll into a 7-year principal and interest loan. That in a year's time will become a 10-year principal and interest loan. So those people who did do sub-trust will essentially get 17 years to repay. Crazy. At the moment, that only applies to 2011 sub-trusts, but because they've pushed this new legislation back, it'll have to also apply to 2012 sub-trusts because they'd be due for repayment 30 June next year. And what they're expecting is, so if you've got a 2013 sub-trust or later, that you'll automatically roll into the new laws, which means you'll get 10 years principal and interest thereafter, because essentially a sub-trust is a UPE. So again, a dog's breakfast of administrative concessions that are trying to fix problems. And again, you might say, well, that's really nice of them to do that. But if they hadn't have caused all this problem back in December 09, they wouldn't have had to have been chasing their tail ever since. There's also a risk in the tax office they believe a risk. But some people, again, might say, thanks for the concession, but I've been thinking about it, and I want to apply the law. And the law says that I breached Division 7A in 2010, because there's no such thing as a subtrust, and I didn't put it on an excluded loan. And 2010 is more than 4 years ago. And it's not a blameworthy act, because you told me I could do this, but you were wrong. The law doesn't say I can do this. And in fact, you're having to change the law to allow you to do this. So you've been taking me down this path I don't want to be on anymore. I'm off. So they created an absolute nightmare. And they, more than anyone, want this new legislation to come in and just flush everything into it, because they've just got concession after concession after workaround after, left and right. So if you do that, absolutely, they know it's a nightmare. They couldn't order the subtrust.
Or just
Well, yeah, because they know people don't understand it, and then they created these little. People don't know whether they're after or not. There'd be more rulings and practice statements on Division 7A than just about any other provision. Transfer pricing probably takes the cake. Thankfully, none of us have to deal with it. But the amount of stuff they've had to put out here on what should be a fairly simple bloody, set of provisions is crazy. So what will happen? Well, what will happen is this new budget now said, well, all UPEs will be loans. What I want to see is from when. We thought it was from December 97, according to the taxman, when he told us in December 09. Are they now going to say that, oops, they weren't Div 7A, which means why do we have subtrust? Did you penalise anybody? Because if you did, and the law says they're only Div 7A loans 1 July 19, surely you have to go back and fix that up. So this is going to be, I think, perhaps something that's taking their time in what they legislate. So current subtrusts, at worst case, will get another 10 years, which is not so bad. If you want to be aggressive about it, you might actually say, what subtrust? I'm going to go by the law I breached in 2010 or 11 or 12, and you're out of time. So you backed yourself into a corner there, Mr. Taxman. Same thing we'll look at with pre-09 UPEs is also what the impact of that is based on this new legislation. Did we breach it 10 years ago? And if we didn't breach it, well, do we put these things on 25-year loans? So there'll be a bit of identification, a bit of thought, navel gazing over the next 6 months as to how we're going to deal with these kind of things. Alright, so let's look at loans from trust, because I said this is the problem area that I see with a lot of accountants, and we'll look at what the proposed changes are in this. Now, these are good changes. Most of them are good in Division 7 anyway, but the stuff in relation to trusts is really good. So at the moment, and indeed for a long time, since 1998 effectively, we've had subdivision EA within Division 7A. And what subdivision EA says is that if a trust makes a loan to a shareholder or an associate of a private company, and in the same year, or basically at 30 June in the same year, that trust also has an unpaid present entitlement owed to that private company, then the loan between the trust and the shareholder is caught by Div 7A. So pre-2009, and the tax office's views on UPEs, this caught a number of accounts because you're focusing on loans from companies. We were told that UPEs were fine, and you weren't necessarily looking at loans out of trusts. So pre-2009, again, another reason I think the tax office didn't do too many audits on this, is they knew that there was a lot of this going around. So you can have a scenario where in 2005 the trust lent money to a shareholder. And then 2008, in your tax planning, you decided to make a distribution to a corporate beneficiary. Now clearly the money that was distributed to the corporate beneficiary, at least distributed on paper, wasn't used to make the loan to the shareholder, because the loan occurred 3 years before. But subdivision EA said, oops, at 30 June 08, both those things are there, so suddenly the loan from the trust to the shareholder is subject to Div 7A. And unless you put that on Div 7A terms, or pay out the UPE, or put the UPE on Div 7A terms, Div 7A deems it. So it was a bit asked about. That's not how Div 7A was supposed to work. It only worked where private company money was used by shareholders and associates. So that's why I've got the loan from the trust in orange and the UPE in red. In 2009, when the tax office said, oops, UPEs are now loans, then essentially they caught the loan of the UPE between the trust and the company as a loan. And they said you had to pay that out, put it on sub-trust, or put it on Div 7A loan. But subdivision EA was still there, which was one of the reasons people said, why are you changing your mind? This section already deals with the naughty bit, which is taking the money out of the trust. Why do you have to change your mind? We have to change our mind because we're right. So you had a situation where after 2009, they could catch both loans. So the UPE they could treat as a Div 7A loan because of their change of view. And then the trust to shareholder loan they could also capture. So they didn't do anything about that either because they realised that that wouldn't be fair. If you put the trust to private company UPE on sub-trust, because sub-trust isn't mentioned in the law, they can still catch you on the loan. So the same dollar might get hit twice. It's just crazy. But the tax office says, no, we won't worry about that. Another workaround, again, to a problem that they created. A little twist on that subdivision EA was, I suppose, smarty accountants and lawyers who thought, well, there's an easy way to get around EA. I understand EA. I understand that if a trust has at the same time a UPE to a company and a loan to a shareholder, that's a problem. So I'll interpose a trust so that the trust that makes the loan doesn't have a UPE to a company. It has a UPE to another trust. How smart am I? Well, that lasted for a little bit until the government got wind of it and they brought in subdivision EB, which basically said, well, we can trace through interposed trusts, so we'll treat any interposed trust as essentially not being there. And we'll deem that present entitlement to be between the target trust and the company. So what does that mean in terms of these changes? Well, from 1 July 19, if all UPEs are actually going to be loans, then we don't need any of those. We're actually going to legislate what the tax office believed the law said. We don't need subdivision EA and we don't need subdivision EB. They'll go. So that simplification, that'll be good. There's an opportunity for us to muck up that's been removed. Another pitfall that they've taken away. But what are they going to replace it with? Because, yeah.
How that you between the trust and the company, and which you get the law,
Yes.
The interest impacts money, the other one is affected.
Depends what they've done with the money, but yes.
So there is no material tax implication in those loans, right?
Yes. So what you'd be saying there is, why wouldn't you do it? People don't do it because they don't understand. Plenty of accountants have no clue. As I say, they're going to repeal subdivision EA and EB. There'd be a lot of accountants who never knew they existed in the first place.
You could have that for tax planning purposes.
It's not that hard.
Like keeping money in the company and
Exactly. It's not a negative. It's usually not a negative impact. It's not like the money's come out to an individual who's using it to buy a boat, so it's not deductible. People breach because they just don't understand. which is again another reason why the tax laws hasn't pushed it too much, because, well, who cares? It's assessable and deductible. Who cares? What's the mischief? But EA was brought in to attack that when that's not really what Div 7A was supposed to attack.
But if that in the previous slide is if there is a loan from the trust to be eligible,
Yep.
where the ATO can come back and say, hold on, this money actually used for a.
If you put the loan between the UPE between the company and the trust on Div 7A terms, then you forget the loan out of the trust. They just want you to put one of them on Div 7A terms. If you put the loan between the trust and the shareholder on Div 7A terms, assessable, non-deductible. So any smart accountant would say exactly what you said. Let's put the loan between the company and the trust on Div 7A terms, deductible, assessable. Sweet. And then that loan's not a problem. So if people thought about it, absolutely they do what you said. The problem is people don't, some accountants don't even think about it. Don't think it's a problem. But it's pre-automatic UPE, I don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about that UPE on its own. But because you're not worrying about that, that loan is subject to EA, it's called by Div 7A. That's the issue. Obviously, that issue is going to go shortly. So for those who are, in bliss, maybe that will solve the problem for them. And there'll be none the wiser that there ever was a problem. But I see that all the time. Accountants who just don't understand. Well, ignore it is where you understand and ignore it. There's plenty out there who don't even
I mean, even for the smaller businesses, a lot of accountants just ignore the duties and just do it. Yeah.
Well, it's the hard stuff you would say to a client. People don't want to tell them the hard stuff.
I've seen accounts having hundreds and hundreds of dollars of plus.
Yeah.
Clearly, me and the client has no idea what that.
Yeah. Pull up the breach that's more than 4 years ago. Maybe there's a benefit. So what do the changes say? Well, they wanted to deal with these UPE issues between trusts and companies. Remember that second principle said they want to remove impediments for trusts to access working capital. But they also had the fourth principle said, well, we don't want to advantage trusts, for example, using corporate money to buy passive assets. So what the board proposed and the government has accepted the recommendation is the business income election. So the business income election is where the trust essentially ticks a box in the tax return. 2020 would be the first year, ticks a box that says the UPE that I've made, the trust to a company, will not be subject to Div 7A. So the trust, a trading trust, makes money, distributes 100 grand to a company, retains 70, distributes 30 for the company to pay the tax. That's $70,000, because I've ticked the box, is not caught by Div 7A. The cost of doing that, though, is the trust must give up the CGT discount on any non-goodwill assets it holds. So if it used that 70 grand to buy BHP shares, don't get a discount. That's what the fourth principle is looking at. Don't reward the holding of passive assets. But if it uses that 70 grand to, pay its bills in the business, pay its employees, buy more stock, that would improve the goodwill. We still get the discount on that. If it uses 70 grand to buy, land and buildings, doesn't get the discount on that. The detail that we don't know is, will that be assets bought after you tick the box, or is it assets that are currently held? You would think it would be assets after you tick the box, but again, that draws another line, and the board didn't like lines. They wanted it to be simple. But if it's a pure trading trust, that all it does is runs the business, and any other assets are held elsewhere, then this will work really nicely. Since 2009, we've been looking to move those businesses into companies, which is good until the stamp duty man says, I want stamp duty on the transfer of goodwill. We can do it under CGT rollovers or CGT concessions, but in WA we get hit with duty. So this might alleviate the need for us to be moving those businesses out of trusts. We can still run the business in the trust, use a corporate beneficiary, build up the UPE, not have Div 7A issues in relation to UPE, provided the only asset is goodwill, plant and stock. So that'll be good, and good for trading trusts going forward. What about Div 7A in relation to the use of company assets? So, as I said, there already is provision within the Tax Act, within Division 7A, to treat the use of private company assets by a shareholder or an associate as a Div 7A payment. So a payment that would be treated as a deemed dividend. And it was meant to deal with cars or boats or property owned by a company, but provided for the private use of a shareholder or an associate. So the company might have a car, the shareholder might get to use it, that shareholder's not a director, so there's no sort of FBT issues. Or if they are a director, the argument is the car's not provided in respect of their employment, it's provided in respect of their shareholding. FBT only applies for benefits provided in respect of employment. It doesn't apply to benefits provided in respect of something other than employment, shareholding. So Div 7A said, well, let's value that benefit, and then the shareholder has to pay that amount to the company, otherwise that's a deemed dividend. Now they gave you no market valuation requirements. There was an otherwise deductible rule, so if it was used for business purposes, there was no Div 7A. It was really looking at private use. It applied from 1 July 2009, and although I've talked about it a few times with people, and even a couple of hours ago, an accountant rang me about a client that's got a yacht in a company. We talked about how Div 7A would apply to that. I don't think I've ever seen anyone actually comply with it. It just is something that people haven't necessarily bothered with. So the new Div 7A, the board said, look, it is something we still need to deal with. We don't want people using corporately taxed money to buy toys and then use them without some tax consequence. So they put a valuation, I suppose, methodology in their proposal. So for depreciating assets, for cars or boats, those kind of things, it's a rental charge. So the rental charge is the depreciation of that car or boat plus an interest component based on the Div 7A interest rate. The detail that we don't know is that based on the days it's used, or is it based on if it's available for use all year, is it an annual charge? We don't know what the detail will say. For appreciating assets, it's the value of the property, so we're dealing with properties, multiplied by the Div 7A interest rate. So if a company has a holiday house worth $500,000 available for use by the shareholders all year, $500,000 times 8.65%, $40,000, that's the usage charge. So if shareholders don't repay $40,000 to the company, it's a deemed dividend of $40,000 to them. To work out what the value of the benefit is, whether that means people will comply or will tap, I suppose. But it's clearly not a good idea to have private assets in a company structure. Distributable surplus. I said up the front end that this is an important concept because the consequence of breaching Div 7A is that a deemed dividend occurs to the shareholder associate that received the benefit. But the deemed dividend is capped by the distributable surplus of the company. So there was a strategy used over the last few years, the sort of GFC years, where people took the opportunity of the company being in a fairly poor way to trigger Div 7A. Because if the distributable surplus of the company is nil or nominal, then the deemed dividend is nil or nominal. So if a company has lent money 4 or 5 years ago, $100,000 when it was in a reasonable position, and that's on Div 7A terms. And then 2 years ago it hit some strife and it has a distributable surplus of nil. Then if that debt is forgiven and triggers Div 7A, the amount of the deemed dividend is nil. So the tax office were well aware of that strategy, and we're obviously, reviewing it to ensure that people's distributable surpluses were calculated correctly. There's a formula in the Act. Distributable surplus is the net assets of the company per the accounting records, plus any Div 7A loans or payments made in that particular year. So it's your distributable surplus for the year of the breach, less the share capital of the company, less any prior year Div 7A loans that are still being paid off in the accounts. Typically, it's only the net assets less the share capital. Now, unfortunately, the Act says net assets per the accounting records. I say unfortunately because you might think, well, that's great, that's easy. But some people think that that's all it is. But there's other provisions within Division 7A that say the tax office has the ability to increase the value or change the value of an asset where it is significantly under or overvalued in the accounts. So goodwill wouldn't be in the accounts and has a value. Now, there's never been any real indication as what is significantly, but I've always taken the position, let's look at the net asset value of the company, less the share capital. So value the goodwill, value the plant equipment, value the stock, value the land and buildings. Is there a distributable surplus? If there is, and it's at least or more than the amount of the loan or the debt forgiveness, well, you're going to get whacked with Div 7A. If it's less than, materially less than, or maybe we want to trigger a breach because the consequence is Div 7A is limited to the amount of distributable surplus. So it's an important concept to understand, but it's also important to know the tax office has the ability to go over it and change the numbers that happen to be in your balance sheet. Now, what did the Board of Tax say? They said, yes, it's a very important concept, and it needs to be included in the new Div 7A, but we don't recommend any changes. So what we have at the moment is what's going to go into the new Div 7A. So if you don't understand it, you need to, because it's not changed. So that's still an important thing to look at. But still a strategy also. If you've got clients that are in tough times and you're carrying Div 7A loans, well, have a look at what the consequences would be of forgiving that loan. Maybe they're not as bad as you think, and at least it cleans it up going forward. Alright, so let's finish off with the honest mistake. So, currently, you identify, let's say a new client comes to you, you pick up there's a mistake. What do? You have the ability at the moment to go to the tax office, tell them that there's a breach that you've identified, explain to them how the breach occurred, and if that occurred because of an honest mistake or an inadvertent omission, then the tax office can disregard the breach and allow you to correct it now. That's section 109RB. So the tax office then puts out a ruling on what is an honest mistake and an inadvertent omission. The problem is, most mistakes and omissions are made by us, accountants and tax agents, and the ruling generally deals with the shareholders making mistakes. That's not really what happens in real life. So there's always been some doubt as to whether a qualified registered tax agent can make an honest mistake in relation to Div 7A. And you've got to prove that the breach was because of that honest mistake before you can then ask for the discretion. So that's a little doubtful. They put out a practice statement, as they do after all rulings, to explain what the ruling meant, that said there are some honest mistakes in accounting. Okay? So mucking up your calculation of the minimum repayment, that's an honest mistake. They even went so far as to say that Section 109EA, the trust loan issue, was not widely understood by accountants, so they might look at that as being an honest mistake. They might also look at the business-to-business loans. You get these crazy discussions sometimes, at least I do, with accountants who seem to think that there's an otherwise deductible rule in Div 7A, that if the loan is from a company to a trust and the trust is using it for business purposes, then that's not Div 7A. And I agree it shouldn't be, because there's no private use of corporately taxed money, but there is no otherwise deductible rule. So the tax office have sort of admitted, not so much through the practice statement, but through other IDs and FAQs they do, that that would be an honest mistake. So they've actually tried really hard, again, workarounds and concessions, to encourage people to come forward and fix the problems. But you have to put a submission together, you have to admit to a mistake by somebody, and then you have to ask for their forgiveness, and you've got to propose some corrective action. And some clients don't like the idea of asking the tax office for anything. Some accountants don't like the idea of doing that either. So although 85+% of those cases are in the affirmative, there's only a couple of hundred of those that go through a year. We've done a few. Only one has ever been knocked back, and that one was pretty dodgy anyway. It was during an audit, so we were sort of forced into that position. So, process isn't great, but if you get through it, it works. What the board says is, it's too onerous, too costly. And the tax office don't want to do it either. They don't want to spend time going through all this process and exercise a discretion. Discretions are really, pre-self-assessment stuff. How can you have self-assessment and have discretions? No one ever knows where they're at. So the board recommended self-correction. So they recommended the ability for people to fix mistakes. They got rid of the term honest mistake and inadvertent omission and said there's two criteria. One is that there was an unintentional breach. They said the key proof of what is an unintentional breach is the fact that you're looking to fix it. Because if it was intentional, you wouldn't fix it. So that's simple. So if you find a breach and you fix it, then that on its own is prima facie evidence that it was unintentional. I like that. That's good. And the second criteria is you take corrective action. So at the moment, corrective action is, if you picked up a breach 2 years ago, you put it on Div 7A terms today, a 5-year loan, because you've already used 2, you make the repayments that should have been made, you pay the interest that should have been paid, and you amend the tax returns to include the interest that you should have received. That's corrective action. So that's what they say should be done. You just fix it up. You obviously don't get, if you fix it up 3 years into a 10-year loan, well, it's then a 7-year loan. You're still going to meet those guidelines, I imagine, all the way through. Amend your tax returns. At the moment, some tax officers want you to go back and amend prior years. Other tax officers will let you put it all in the current year. It's only a tiny issue. Hopefully they'll come out and say you put it all in the current year rather than have to go back and amend prior years. So that's all good. You pick up a new client, you see a breach, you can fix it up. You don't have to get the tax office involved. You don't have to get the old tax agent involved. Obviously, you tell the client, and you fix it up, and you move on. Everyone's happy. One sort of strange thing they've thrown in there that, again, I don't think, I can understand the principle, I don't think it'll work, is a self-correction penalty. So what they don't want is people getting rewarded for making mistakes. So they proposed a 5% self-correction penalty. But anyone, even the tax office, won't just accept money from you unless they know what it's for. So that probably means you'd have to tell them somehow on the tax return that you're paying a self-correction penalty. And then haven't you essentially told them that you made a mistake, which is what we want to avoid. We just want to fix it up. But it was only 10. But then, if you're going to do an audit, I'm sitting there in, Northbridge thinking of my next year's audit plan. Let's just pull all the tax returns and tick the self-correction penalty box and have a look. Because maybe they haven't all done it right. I would have thought the easiest way to put a self-correction penalty on would be to have a self-correction penalty interest rate. So when you do the correction, rather than do it at 8.65%, maybe you do it at 12%. So the return doesn't outwardly show that there's been self-correction made, but obviously people are having to pay higher interest because they didn't pay it for the last 2 or 3 years. And then it would just wash its way through. Again, hopefully that'll come through in the detail. But that's a good one, because then we can move forward without ignoring the breach in the past. So that pretty much wraps it up. I think it's pretty clear to see, and I was probably quite cynical about it, the amount of concessional practice statement workaround solutions that tax office have had to do, certainly in the last 8 to 10 years, clearly shows that Div 7A isn't working how anyone wants it to work. And the tax office, to their credit, are really supporting these changes. They back themselves into some corners with these workarounds that clearly I'm sure today they would wish they didn't do. So we want these changes to occur, we want it to be simple, we want it to be clear. Most of those proposals are along those lines. Obviously the devil's going to be in the detail. We don't know whether they'll turn something simple into a monster like essentially happened last time. But hopefully within the next few months we'll get some idea of what that detail will be. The deferral, although disappointing in some respects, also gives us that opportunity to plan. Gives us that opportunity to identify our pre-97 loans, excuse me, and our pre-09 UPEs, and see if we can do something with them. If we can, now's the time. Otherwise, we're just going to roll into 1 July 19 and have to deal with them over 10 years. Short question.